If a young person can hotwire a car using a USB port, they can probably engineer some amazing product and sell it at a substantial price.
Right.
We just need to channel that intellect, that intelligence in something more productive. And a great way to do that is through entrepreneurship. We have some culture issues that we need to confront.
Right.
And by we, I do mean people of color concentrated in the urban core. Our music, our movies, our TV shows all glorify violence. When you add social media, reality TV, the fact that I can go on YouTube and enter in search terms like gang shootout, and I can watch video after video after video, that thing that was once distant and was only encompassed in the music that I listened to, now is right in front of my face. The 60-year-old grandma that's lived in her house for 40 years, but there's this house 3 houses down where they are selling drugs, they are shooting, celebratory gunfire. Grandma wants to call the police, but grandma can't protect herself.
Don't take no breaks, I just do it. Just watch me work, I prove it. I was born with a gift, got the blueprint, top of the class like an A+ student.
Hey, what's up, good people? Welcome back to another Student Entrepreneur episode. I'm your host, Zeke Wanganga, and as you know, on this show, we're bringing successful entrepreneurs to dive into your journeys of how they started a business and how they scaled it so that you can be inspired to do the same. And today, I'm excited as usual for our guest. We actually changed the subject a little bit. So today I'm going to read from my note a little bit because we have a lot of things to get to today. So if you don't mind me, let's get into the show. Okay, so today we're diving into really important conversations about security in our city. And I'm thrilled to be joined by Melesa Johnson. Melesa is not only a champion for public safety, but she's also running for Jackson County prosecutor. She's been on the front lines of addressing safety concerns that impact both everyday Kansanians and entrepreneurs alike. But before I go ahead to the show, I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor at KC Sourceling. If you are a founder who is looking for resources, funding, anything you need to scale your company from 0 to whatever 100 is for you, you got to go to KC Sourceling and get the info. You all know her. Melesa Johnson, she is running for Jackson County prosecutor, and I'm really excited to be able to chat with you today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, it's an honor.
And this is quite an ensemble.
Thank
I
you.
must
You
say.
too. Shoot, I gotta come ready. I gotta come ready. I can't play around. But let me ask you this, Melesa. For those who don't know who you are, give us a little bit of a joint of how you got to where you are today.
Well, I am a lifelong resident of Jackson County, Kansas City specifically. And if we drill down a bit deeper, I live in the 3rd District in the Oak Park neighborhood. And so when we are talking about crime, I just watched the PBS produced documentary, A Tale of Three Cities. And in that documentary, they report that over 70% of crime that happens in this community happens in 10% of the landmass in our community. Well, my home, both where I was raised and where I currently live, is encompassed in that landmass, that 10% of where the vast majority of our crime happens. And so I developed a very genuine and close connection to this issue at a very young age. Yeah. I vividly remember being young and at track practice and experiencing my first shootout. Then, culminating in the Chiefs Parade. I was right there by the stage. Yeah. Was involved in that shootout. And so violence has touched me over the course of my life in a multitude of ways. And so after going to college at Columbia University in the city of New York, I wanted to come back home to kind of start my adulting phase of my life and decided to go to the University of Missouri for law school so that I could be a bit closer to home and establish myself here. Yeah. And that's exactly what I did. After law school, after graduating with honors, I got my first opportunity at the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office. And after that, I went to clerk for a federal judge, worked at 2 nationally recognized civil defense litigation firms, and even served as a combat commissioner overseeing the distribution of millions into violence prevention and intervention initiatives. And the reason why I talk about my origin story, my home, so much in the course of my campaign is because we have to face the reality that no matter how hard you try, no matter how smart you are, you cannot solve a problem that you don't fully understand. Right. And for better or for worse, I know crime. Right. And that is why I'm so excited to be embarking on this journey and leveraging not only my professional experiences, but my personal experiences for the betterment of all of Jackson County. Because we do have to be clear, The crime that is plaguing our communities in Brookside, Waldo, communities that have not dealt with this issue to the degree that they are now. The people that are stealing your car don't live in Brookside and Waldo. The people that are vandalizing your business don't live in Brookside and Waldo. They live where I live. And so in order to really not only intervene in ongoing crime with the full force of the law, but prevent it before it happens,
Right.
I have a unique set of skills that can get that done.
So let me ask you this. I know you said 10%.
Yep.
Where is this 10% and why it doesn't come from that 10%?
That is a rich question.
Yeah.
That is a rich question. And in that 10% of our community, you will see a lot of constants. Lack of affordable housing, job deserts, food deserts, poor environmental quality. Missouri was one of the last states to ban the box. And so we have a lot of returning citizens that are concentrated in that area because of the poverty index.
Yeah.
If you look at the census tract data. So all of those are kind of your more well-known predictors of crime, those socioeconomic factors that are tried and data proven and shown to have a direct correlation to crime. But what I want to talk about are some of the less known or less obvious factors. We have some culture issues that we need to confront.
Right.
And by we, I do mean people of color concentrated in the urban core. Our music, our movies, our TV shows all glorify violence, right? We're talking about car thefts. Well, that stemmed from social media. Somebody elsewhere, not even in Jackson County, posting on TikTok how you could hotwire a Kia using a USB port. It spread like wildfire, and then it became this cultural phenomenon stemming from social media. So we have all of these intangible factors that are contributing to our crime issue as well, and we need somebody that is much more closely aligned to that culture to be able to confront it, get ahead of it, and decrease its impact on the crime infrastructure we're experiencing.
So let me ask you this, because I know you mentioned, and I know a lot of people are going to be like, I don't think the music that I listen to affects me in any ways. Because when you say culture, a lot of culture is a big part of like everything, right?
Yes.
Specifically, define what you mean by a lot of music have violence, because I know a lot of people are going to come in after that. Clearly state your stand on that position, yeah.
So I listen to rap.
Yeah.
I listen to rap. I was raised off of Tupac, okay? My mother used to record Keep Your Head Up on my voicemail before every single track that I had. One of my favorite rappers is probably one of the most violent, Lil Boosie, right? Like that is my guy. I know all the words, word for word. The problem is when I was growing up, it was the music in isolation, right? And frankly, I had enough community around me that it made it easier for me to decipher reality from the music, right? Like I can take in these very vile and sometimes violent lyrics, but then I know that that doesn't translate into how I move about the world. Well, present day, when you add social media, reality TV, the fact that I can go on YouTube and enter in search terms like gang shootout, and I can watch video after video after video, that thing that was once distant and was only encompassed in the music that I listened to, now is right in front of my face. And now I'm desensitized to the impact that this music is having on my brain, because now it's not just the music. It is the reality TV and all of these streaming apps that we now have. You can even put more violent content on the streaming apps. And so it is the amount of inputs that our young people who do still have impressionable minds are dealing with. And frankly, even though I just graduated high school in 2007, I didn't have to deal with all of these things. And I had community around me that made sure I saw things for what they were. Those realities, especially as it pertains to our juveniles that are encompassed in the criminal justice system, they just don't have that.
Yeah, no, I think it's very important what you just said, because I know that the algorithm these days does not care what your age is. They care about what you want to watch. So whatever you watch, they keep repeating that same thing. And I think, like you said, kids don't have the opportunity to choose nowadays because they're on social media all the time. Like,
exactly.
When I grew up, I was, 2006, I was in high school, right? So like those days, I was like, there was no social media. The list we had back then was before Facebook. That was little thing that they had MySpace or whatever.
Right, Black Planet.
There was nothing like no one has to force you to watch something, but now it's always pressed upon. But let's shift gears a little bit, right? So because I know when it comes to KC has this. I don't know what it is that's making it not to happen, but what do you think KC is missing when it comes to insecurity, and what do you think your position is that would make it better?
It doesn't help that Missouri has the third most relaxed gun laws in the entire country. I think that directly ties to the fact that Kansas City and St. Louis routinely appear on the FBI's top 10 most dangerous cities list. It does not help that we are suffering with our affordable housing stock, just like many other places in the country. I may have mentioned that Missouri was one of the last states to ban the box. So when a person returning home from incarceration or a person that has a felony conviction, we were one of the last states to not force them to disclose that on their job application. And then we rank amongst the top in states in recidivism because we do not do right by our returning population. And we do need to have parameters in place to make sure that people have adequate access to opportunity so that they don't re-offend.
See, when people hear gun laws, people get turned off. They say no guns, no guns. But I don't think that's what you're saying.
No.
What you're saying is restrictions.
Yes.
And you specifically point to maybe 3 things that you're saying, these are things that needs to happen. We're not taking your guns away. We're saying put some restrictions to that.
I am a gun owner. Right. I do want to preface my response by that. When I went to law school, it was the first time that I had my own apartment as a single woman by myself. Well, my god brothers, took me to the gun range and was like, all right, now it's time for you to learn. And I learned. And I learned more and I became more comfortable because I think education around firearms is something that we don't talk enough about because it does garner a level of comfortability. But what can garner more comfortability, because we've had babies in this community get a hold of unsecured firearms and unfortunately kill themselves, safe storage laws. It means nothing for you to safely secure your firearm in a gun lock, especially if you live in a home around children. Having your guns insured so that if bodily injury is caused on another individual, there are some mechanisms in place that can help that victim or the family of that victim restore themselves. Red flag laws, making sure that people with a diagnosable mental health issue do not have access to unfettered firearms. A couple of years, Congress passed the first bipartisan gun safety measure in 20 years, over 20 years. They gave states funding to implement red flag laws. Most states took it. The state of Missouri did not. These are easy changes that can be made to make sure that we are complying with the Second Amendment, but understanding that there are some people in this community that simply should not have guns. Simply should not have guns. And if you do have them, understanding your responsibility to everybody around you.
See, and I know that, having guns, owning guns are a lot of about American culture. It's very engrossed with that. I would say this, from being from Nigeria, I didn't shoot my first gun until I came to the U.S. Because it was not a thing. Like, my dad had a gun, but that was the only person who had a gun because he was a man of the house. He had to secure his family, right? So I understand what you're saying, having restrictions so that way people are educated of what a gun does. Because it's a different thing too, playing video games, watching movies. Guns are so much more accessible. It's easier to shoot. The first time I shot a gun, it was different from a movie. I was like, oh, whoa. It was a small gun, but it pulled me back. So education is very important for people.
Absolutely. Education and the parameters being in place to make sure that people that should not have guns do not have them. And this actually helps our law enforcement officers be able to confiscate weapons. Because right now, in the state of Missouri, we have permitless conceal and carry. You don't even need to get your conceal and carry license anymore to carry a concealed weapon. Wow. And we also have stand your ground laws as well that both were implemented in 2016. And so what do you see happen after both of those law changes were made? Homicide skyrocketing. Because a police officer will do a pedestrian stop and they don't need a conceal and carry license to be able to have their firearm. So guess what? The police officer just has to give it back to them, even if they did commit a different offense. And so these laws that we have in place are actually inhibiting our ability to uphold the law and order that more conservative lawmakers in Jefferson City claim that they want. And so it's all interconnected. And I would love to see some changes made in that regard. And if elected, I will definitely be advocating for them.
So I know there's probably someone who's watching this and saying, I don't know what you guys are talking about, but I don't really know what a Jackson prosecutor does. what does the Jackson prosecutor, what are you doing when you get into the office?
Yes. So the Jackson County prosecutor primarily handles felonies. So after a local law enforcement agency, and I do want to be clear, this is all about Jackson County, not just Kansas City, even though the vast majority of our crime happens in Kansas City. But this serves the Lee Summit Police Department, Blue Springs Police Department, Grandview, Raytown Police Department. Once any of those local law enforcement agencies investigate a crime and put together a case file, they submit it to the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office to evaluate the evidence and then file the appropriate charges under the current law.
Okay.
That is essentially nuts and bolts of what the Jackson County Prosecutor does. However, in 2024, because I understand that the only good type of crime that exists is the crime that never gets a chance to happen in the first place, the crime that is prevented.
Right.
A Jackson County prosecutor has a lot of work to do outside of the courtroom as well.
Yeah.
Under the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office is a fund called COMBAT, the Community-Backed Anti-Crime Tax.
Right.
And that funding is to be invested into violence prevention and intervention initiatives. So that means the Jackson County prosecutor in 2024 is not only responsible
Right.
for upholding the law and prosecuting in accordance with the law, they're also responsible for partnering with community organizations, partnering with our private philanthropic
Right.
community, our business community, our entrepreneurial community on building coalitions and collaborations to try to prevent crime before it happens as well. And so I fully believe and am so ready to take this on.
Right.
It is a balance of, yes, we're going to hold people accountable in the courtroom, but we're going to deploy a lot of resources.
Yeah. See, and the question I'm about to ask you, I don't know how this fits in your position, but I'm always concerned about the mental state of people today, right? I think the word is everyone is angry these days, just out of everything that's happening, right? I don't know if this is a position of what your office does or if it's an extension of it. What can be done to have educations around like mental health for people who are possessing these firearms? Because like I know that if someone is angry, if I'm angry at you and I don't have a gun, I can just fight with you without shooting you and killing you. We just discuss it and have a conversation. But if I have a gun that's accessibly, I can just act immediately. Are there things that you think or have that can be able to, make that time not happen before it even gets there?
Thank you so much for raising that, because if you look at our homicide statistics, the vast majority of killings that happen in Jackson County stem from a mere argument. Somebody stepped on my shoe. Somebody bumped into me at the club, right? Somebody looked at me wrong. That is, in fact, what happened at the Chiefs Parade shooting. And so there is a spectrum of mental health concerns that we are dealing with in our community. You have your concrete diagnoses, schizophrenia, depression, but then on the other end of that spectrum, you have poor conflict resolution skills. All are centered around mental health. And in this community, where in the 40s and the 50s, we closed all of our state-funded mental health hospitals, and we never replenished that stock. We're living in a community where people are walking around with untreated mental health issues, and Truman University Health has a wait list. Swope has a wait list. Sam Rogers has a wait list. So where are these people supposed to get help? Where are they supposed to get treated? Yeah. Now, there are amazing organizations in this community that are trying some innovative things, like the Kansas City, Missouri Health Department. They have what are called community ambassadors that are placed at your Family Dollar. They're the clerk at the checkout line. They're the ushers at the church, and they have been trained to at least detect a mental health issue so that they can then contact a qualified provider to get that individual treatment. But what I want to do as Jackson County prosecutor, understanding the lack of available care to be offered in the public space, I want to engage our private sector, our private providers, by setting up a voucher program so that the government would actually finance people getting therapy sessions and treatment sessions at some of our private providers to expand the amount of ground that we are able to cover as it pertains to treating and offering resources to the people that we're trying to serve.
I have so many questions. I have so many questions.
I have time.
I have so many questions. So one thing that's close to my heart, right, is New House, right? It's a nonprofit that I've spoken at, right? When it comes to abuse in the family. I think most of the gun violence and people being killed is usually about spousal abuse. Are there any protections or any restrictions on that end for people who are in abusive relationships to be able to not have arms? Like, what do you think could be a solution to that?
Victim and witness protection, which is a huge part of my platform, fits squarely into that. I want to take a moment and applaud Newhouse as well for the amazing work that Courtney and her entire team are doing over there. Something that's really important to me is a holistic approach. And I'm sure we will dive deeper into what exactly that means as it pertains to my platform. But Newhouse is a perfect representation of a holistic approach. Not only do they provide housing for domestic violence victims, but they provide attorney support. They do safety planning so that they can walk you through setting up a ex parte or a restraining order from your assailant. They have resources to make sure that you feel like you have adequate room to even be able to leave. Because a lot of the people at the center of these domestic disputes and issues, you're asking me to choose between my personal safety and my child being able to go to daycare this week, or me being able to have food in my refrigerator. And so victim and witness protection is so important because people want to advocate for themselves. People want to advocate for their communities. But sometimes if I'm asking you to come into court and to testify in front of the person that you lay down with every night for the past 10 plus years, I could potentially be asking you to sacrifice your own safety and sanctity of yourself and your children. So temporary and permanent relocation services. Do you need to be in a hotel for a month or so that you even feel like you can come down to the police station and offer a statement, so that you feel like you even can come into court and testify on behalf of the case? Also resources, even down to shelters that allow you to keep your dog, right? Or that shelters that allow you to house your entire family. All of that plays a role in our ability to administer justice. We have to do better by our victims and witnesses so that they can do what they've always wanted to do, and that's stand up for the side of right.
That's powerful because I knew I want to ask that, because I've told my story. My mom was in an abusive relationship, but we were, I would say lucky enough to be able to come out of it, right? But that's always something that's close to my heart, making sure that women are being protected, especially because in those cases, usually women who are the victim, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I may extend a bit on that, I want to also mirror your experience and your passions to the 60-year-old grandma that's lived in her house for 40 years. But there's this house 3 houses down where they are selling drugs, they are shooting, a celebratory gunfire. Grandma wants to call the police. Grandma wants to participate in the prosecution process. But grandma can't protect herself.
Right.
If she does cooperate, or if they do see police cars outside of grandma's house, what do we expect grandma to do? Grandma's going to stay silent. And if grandma stays silent, what does that mean for our ability to administer justice? We can't, because our primary and main witness is unwilling to come forward because we have not put parameters in place to make her feel comfortable to do so. That rings true across so many different categories of offenses. And so victim and witness advocacy and protection is at the center of a lot of the work that I want to do.
Yeah, that's fantastic because I know that, there's such a thing as the word snitching or things like that. And it's such a big thing, especially in the community where who said something, they're going to come after the person. So
exactly.
Is that person protected? Can I freely speak what I'm seeing? And then let's shift gears a little bit. Another topic that is close to my heart is entrepreneurship, businesses. And this might be a 2-part question. One is there's been a lot of break-ins in the past couple of months of some of the business that I know. What do you think the city can do to be able to kind of make sure that business or secure or protected from all these thefts, or making sure that people don't even think about theft because they know there's a security around them? And secondly, is there in your office, is there an opportunity to provide resources for organizations like Keystone, where it's a place where resources are offered freely, where people can be able to come and start a business? Because if you don't know what you need to protect your business, you can't even start it.
Thank you for framing that question the way that you did, because when I think about entrepreneurship and the primary roles that it can play and that it does play in crime is, number one, how do we better protect our small business community that is in existence right now? And then 2, how can building and creating more entrepreneurs actually reduce crime in the long run. So we'll start with number one. Our small business community is hurting. Absolutely being ravaged by the property crime that is taking control of Jackson County right now. And the reason why I feel like this is so important, these are not victimless crimes. People pour their everything into the brick and mortar, into their online business, into whatever it is that they are creating. In the World Cup, we don't get big marquee events like that so people can come to Kansas City and eat at Applebee's. That's not why we get them. We get those type of opportunities because of the vitality of our small business community. And when you look at the data, and I am all about being data informed, because if we are not being specific and accurate with the diagnosis of the problem, we will never be able to devise real solutions. And if you look at the data, only 6.4% of all property crimes are submitted to the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office for charging. Now, there's a number of reasons for that. Property crimes cases are very difficult to solve. Our law enforcement agencies are short-staffed right now, so that proactive, predictive policing is just not as common or as possible right now, given the staffing shortages. And also, we have not modernized our approach. And so the way that we tackle all of these problems, at least my plan, is this. How do we find a way to work better with police departments to expand their capacity, fill in their resource holes so that we can get more of these cases investigated and submitted to the prosecutor's office? That's problem number one. When we do get that figured out and get an influx of cases coming into the office, how do we find the manpower to be able to handle the prosecution of all of those cases? Because the Jackson County Prosecutor's Office currently is fully staffed. And then C, how do we tackle the long wait times that our community is experiencing? If you have a nonviolent property crime, you might be on hold for 4-5 hours. That is just not feasible for a small business owner who is trying to put the pieces back together and reopen their doors for business. So the way that I'm going to handle the first problem, getting more of those cases investigated, we're going to set up a new property crimes prosecution division in my administration. It will have a number of components. Number one, a hotline where victims of nonviolent property crime offenses can call if they've been on hold with KCPD or Lee Summit PD or Ravetown PD, any PD for too long. We will then deploy investigators and prosecutors out of my office to go and do a preliminary review of available evidence. Everybody has cameras. Everybody has surveillance footage. And if we feel like there's meat and potatoes there, then we will engage the law enforcement agency to finish working up the case and submit it for prosecution. This way, we are being sensitive to the limited resources at our local law enforcement agencies, but we are being more responsive to victims' loss. That will get more cases in the door. So then to handle the manpower issue, I'm going to staff this new division with a handful of attorneys who will be the supervisors, but primarily law students. We're going to put our up-and-coming bright legal minds to work at UMKC, KU, even MU, if they can get down here 2 days a week. The law students get practical experience to supplement their legal education because you do not learn how to practice law in law school. The victims feel heard and responded to. Our law enforcement officers feel supported because we are being true partners and filling in their resource holes when we can. But most importantly, the offenders are held accountable before their criminality continues to escalate. And we can finally send a deterring message to the community that, hey, if you commit a property crime in Jackson County, you will be caught. If only 6.4% of those cases are being submitted for prosecution, that means 94% of people that commit a property crime go without consequence. Of course, I'm going to keep doing it. Of course, I'm not going to change my pattern of behavior. Why would I? There's no consequence to do so. So that's how I plan to better support and advocate for our business community that currently exists. But when you think about returning citizens, when you think about crime prevention, which is usually rooted in getting somebody a well-paying job, entrepreneurship is one of the most felon-friendly environments as it pertains to workforce in this country. And so I'm going to be starting a brand new diversion program in Jackson County. Right now, we have Veterans Court, Mental Health Court, and Drug Court. But in order to participate in those diversion programs, you have to either have a mental health diagnosis, you either have to be a drug addict or a veteran. What about everybody else that commits a nonviolent crime?
Right.
We don't have adequate jail space to house them. So what are we going to do? Just let them go without consequence? So this new diversion program is going to connect nonviolent offenders to modern workforce development opportunities. And the reason why I say modern is because we have a bad habit in this country and this community of telling high-risk and returning citizens you are only capable of construction. Now, that is lucrative and honest work. So if you want to do that, we have that available to you. But what if you want to be an entrepreneur and you just don't know where to start?
Right.
We have organizations in spaces like we're in right now where people can come and get all of the tools to get their brilliant new idea off of the ground. This is the harsh reality. If a young person can hotwire a car using a USB port, they can probably engineer some amazing product and sell it at a substantial price.
Right.
We just need to channel that intellect, that intelligence in something more productive. And a great way to do that is through entrepreneurship and connecting people that are looking for a path to restoration and a path to a livable wage, making sure that entrepreneurship is on the table. So I will be partnering with organizations to make sure that that track is available in our new opportunity court, because that is what it is going to be called, but also conflict resolution training and financial literacy education as well.
Okay. Yes, I'm glad you touched on entrepreneurship, right? Because I believe that ecosystems like Keystone, like I said, shout out to Keystone, because without Keystone, this wouldn't exist, right? Being at Keystone, I started like 3 businesses in the space of like 2 years, right? Because thank you, I appreciate it. But it's just because, it's a space where you see people who are moving and shaking, who are doing big. God have mercy. Okay. Just in the space of 2 years, I've started like 3 businesses, right? It's just because I have a space where I can come and see people who are entrepreneurs, right? I'm in the right environment. I can see resources. So I'm glad that you touched on it, because that's a key part for me. Because if I'm not in this environment, I might be somewhere else, right? I might be doing some other thing that people might not like, right? So I think making pathways for younger people to be able to learn about entrepreneurship. How can you start? Where do you start? Shout out to Case Hustling for sponsoring the episode. If you're an entrepreneur, go to Case Hustling, find your resources. But I want to ask you this. There's a national debate about, police reform, about police accountability, right? What are some things you're going to make sure that happens for police to be more transparent in the way that they conduct their services and the way that, they treat people?
That is a great question, because I have had this conversation with numerous chiefs of police in Jackson County. And I very clearly state, you cannot expect me to hold community accountable and think that I won't do the same for you. So there are ways that we can get in front of making sure that another Cameron Lamb never happens, that Blaine Newton is no longer allowed to be replicated on the police force. And these are not national incidents. These are officers right here in Jackson County that have a documented, I don't necessarily want to say history, but have been shown to violate the constitutional rights of the citizens that they are called to serve. In places like Milwaukee, they use what are called early behavioral detection systems, where something as small as discourteous speech to a resident will land you in a full day of restorative training. Because our officers, and frankly, everybody in the criminal legal system, needs to understand one negative interaction with a resident could have a negative impact on our ability to actually prosecute a case further down the line.
Right.
For example, young woman sees something and is trying to report a crime to a police officer. He is extremely rude to her, or she is extremely rude to her, completely dismissive. That is going to be etched in that young woman's brain for the rest of her life.
Right.
So if she sees something again, she's not going to step up. She's not going to offer up her testimony or what she's seen. So these early behavioral detection systems can catch negative interactions early before, again, they continue to escalate. And people can have their respective opinions about our current prosecutor, Jean Peters Baker. But one thing she has given us is a precedent in Jackson County that police officers can and will be prosecuted criminally if the evidence supports such. And that is something that I'm fully willing to continue and to build on, because one bad apple taints the rest of the system. And we cannot afford that. Look what is happening right across state line with Roger Golubski, Detective Golubski. All of the cases that he's touched are now being re-reviewed under scrutiny. We need to make sure that our police officers are complying with the constitutional rights of our residents.
Right.
But I do feel that the prosecutor's office has a role to play in equipping them with the necessary training, the advocacy, so that they can go about in the community and be compliant with people's 4th and 14th Amendment rights.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a key point, because even myself, I can sometimes don't want to call the police because I don't know how they're going to react when they get there. Because the way they're going to treat me might make me feel like I'm the suspect, right? So in most cases, I might say, like, I don't know, I don't want to deal with it. And I think that has become a cultural thing because of the way the relationship we have with the police is not the best.
Exactly. And what you just described is a byproduct of the conduct of few. I work closely with law enforcement officers in my day job right now. The vast majority of them are kind. They are genuine. They are passionate. They want to do amazing work. But that reluctance and that hesitancy on behalf of our residents is a direct byproduct of the few that have ruined it for everybody. And I do view it as my responsibility to check the few and hold the few accountable so that the rest of us can continue the very important work that we have to do.
I think it's really awful that whenever someone sees a police officer, they immediately think fear as opposed to being secured. I feel I'm safe now. There's even more fear because I don't know what's going to happen next. I think that on its own brings another barrier to the solution that they might be needed.
Absolutely.
Now, I want to ask you this, because I know in the news, if anyone has seen this, but most of the crimes that are happen in KC are done by juveniles. Why do you think that is the case, and what are you trying to do to stop that?
A lot of what we discussed earlier, that culture word that often gets thrown around, but the culture that our young people, especially in the urban core, are dealing with, and not even just the urban core, frankly, because when you look at opioid usage, when you look at fentanyl deaths, they're touching every single corner of Jackson County, regardless if it's the urban core or the suburbs or unincorporated Blue Summit or Lee Summit or Lake Lottawanna or Sugar Creek, okay? The culture that our young people are having to grow up in is dangerous. It's dangerous. The proliferation of pills, the proliferation of firearms. We've already touched on how violence is glorified in our music and our movies and our TV shows. They have become desensitized to the amount of violence that they experience because they can watch it on TV and they experience it in real life. People also no longer solve their problems through conversation or frankly, even a fist fight like they did when I was growing up. It is an automatic reach for a gun. And then social media, a lot of the crimes that are happening are being carried out via social media. We talked about how the education on how to steal a key using a USB port, that spread like wildfire on TikTok. The recent school shooting threats that were running rampant in Jackson County, all over Jackson County, that took off on social media. And so our juveniles have so many inputs that their young, impressionable minds are not able to decipher and weed through. And then when you start talking about the familial structures that we are dealing with, a lot of younger parents that might be wrapped up in their own lives and not able to be as present or maybe even sometimes interested in being as present of a parent as they should be. And I'm not being harsh or stereotypical, but these are things that I see every Wednesday morning when I sit in KCPD Shoot Review, where we workshop all of the fatal and non-fatal shootings that happened the week prior. So I understand what our young people are faced with, which is why what I'm about to say is a very difficult thing for me to confront, but we have to confront it. We have to hold our juveniles more accountable for the crimes that they commit. Now, nonviolent, low-level, Property crimes, absolutely, they need to be prosecuted, but keep it at the family court level because there is a separate, almost prosecutor, if you will, called the juvenile officer that handles all juvenile cases that are submitted to it by local law enforcement. But once that juvenile has been certified as an adult, usually if they've killed somebody or if they've shot somebody or if this is their fourth or more offense, I, as Jackson County prosecutor, have to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. Because what I can't afford is for other 14, 15, and 16-year-olds to think that they can conduct themselves in such grossly violent ways and receive no consequences. That's doing them a disservice. That's selling them a dream that they can be out here causing and wreaking havoc and nothing's going to happen to them. If we sell them that dream, we're fast-tracking their journey to either a coffin or a jail cell. So we have to prosecute juveniles that have been certified as adults more often and more severely. But we cannot talk about juveniles without talking about parents.
Right.
And I have seen numerous cases where parents are just completely checking out on their parental responsibilities and leaving the rest of Jackson County to deal with their disinterest. It's not fair. It's not right. And it will no longer be tolerated under my administration. If I have evidence to prove that you were either complicit or criminally negligent in the conduct of your juvenile child, I will be prosecuting you under endangering the welfare of a child statute, which is on the books in the state of Missouri. We have to get honest about the role that accountability plays in this ecosystem. It's not it. It's not the only mechanism we have at our disposal. And frankly, it's not the only thing that is going to get us to a safer Jackson County. But if we say we want a holistic approach, holistic means accountability is part of that holistic approach and that ecosystem.
So there's so many topics, so I don't think we have time. But it's something you mentioned, prosecuting the juvenile to the fullest extent when they're like the third, fourth time. What I want to ask is this, because I think, race also plays a role in that, of how maybe a first time a kid who's a black kid gets more time than its counterpart, right? Do you think prosecuting at the full extent, or what is the solution to making sure that the person who is prosecuted the first time doesn't come back to the court again? What can we put in place to make sure that they understand the full gravity of what it means to be prosecuted, or what it means, like consequences, understand the consequences? Because I think that's the biggest thing. For example, let me give an example. When I was a kid, weed was a huge thing. And my mom always told me that there was an uncle of mine, we actually laughed about it today, uncle of mine who smoked weed one time. And he was like this buff guy, strong guy. He smoked weed one time and he ran back home because the weed was too, like his brain was trying to go crazy. And every time he told me that story, like, you want to do that? I'm like, I don't think I want to do that. I don't think I'm good, right? I understand what comes after that. Do you think it's, like you just said, with the parents too, is it a lack of understanding of consequences or?
I think a lack of understanding of consequences certainly plays a role. I think we need to do more education on the collateral consequences of a felony conviction. I don't think we do that enough. It's not just that you might not be able to get a job. It's not as simple as that.
No.
When you're applying for housing and renting your first apartment, yes, we have source of income discrimination on the books here in the city of Kansas City, but they are still able to look at your criminal history and make a holistic determination that I don't want you renting here. Your car insurance rates.
Right.
I just spoke to a group of juveniles that were from Hilltop Correction Facility, which is the juvenile detention facility. And I asked them, how many of your mothers complain about high automobile insurance rates? They almost all raised their hands. Well, newsflash, that's because y'all keep stealing cars in this part of town. You're causing that. Who wants to be able to go to a club in Westport when they're legally of age? All of them raise their hands. Well, guess what? There probably won't be any more left, sweetheart. Bridgers is closed. Ale House is closed. Who wants to go to a Chiefs victory parade? You might not ever get one again. So having these conversations with our young people about all of the collateral consequences that are attached to the commission of crime is important. And when you talk about racial equity, I do want to touch on that briefly. The current administration has explored implementing a process called race blind charging. So when you get the case file, you have all of the other information besides the race of the offender. I am fully committed to continuing the exploration of that. It's a fairly new legal doctrine, so there's not a lot of empirical data out there about its effectiveness, but I do think that that is something that we should keep in our toolbox. But we have to make sure people understand consequences.
Right.
But when you say, how do we prevent people from reoffending? That's when the resource deployment piece really comes in. We rank amongst the top in this country in recidivism. Over 80% of people that commit a crime in this state will do so again. So the only way that we get out in front of that is making sure that we have a community that is a safe and prosperous landing place for somebody that is returning home, especially when 6 out of 7 people sentenced to incarceration will return home to their community.
Right. Yeah.
So the affordable housing piece, the mentorship piece, the mental health piece, the modern workforce development piece is all crucial if we're really going to deliver on the promise of public safety.
Yeah, I'm convinced. Thank you, Melesa, for coming on the show. Thank you so much for sharing all the insights. I think for me personally, you get me into your world, understanding what Jackson Persecutor does and what are the important key things that we should be looking at. Because I think there is a lot of the national debate, the national election, but when it comes to our city, when it comes to our county, I think people should be paying more attention to these different issues because that's what affects them on a daily basis.
I agree.
So thank you so much for all you do. Thank you for coming to the show. Thank you for shedding light on the different key issues. And I'm looking forward to also tell people to go vote because that's very important.
Yes.
Early voting have started. Let people go vote.
Early voting has started. Today, we are filming this on October 22nd. For the next 2 weeks, even leading up to November 4th, the day before Election Day, you can vote. You do not need an excuse. I highly recommend it because I am confident we are going to have record turnout numbers on November 5th. So please go vote. You cannot complain about things that you're not willing to advocate for at the ballot box.
Right.
And I know our generation, younger people, we might not have always been as interested in leveraging our voice. But I grew up in a family where my grandmother told me we don't miss elections around here. And I fully am hopeful that other people will align with that perspective and get out there and vote like your life depends on it because it absolutely does.
Hey, thank you so much. For those who are watching from home, you know what time it is. It's been another Entrepreneur episode. I'm your host, Gwanganga. Follow, share, go vote. And thank you for supporting the platform. And I'll see you next episode. Bye-bye for now.